9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 23. Journey through the Cave. The Stitchpunk clan woke as soon as the sun rose over them, gray lights streaming into the mansion. 9 stirred as he felt the weak sun on his face, the light shining behind his lenses. He reluctantly opened his eyes, wishing the morning hadn't come so soon, but the pain wasn't as intense as it was yesterday. He took a deep, slow breath, wincing slightly as his chest protested, giving a light groan. He lifted himself up, grimacing as small, sharp pains shot throughout his body. Sighing, he placed a hand on the sacks behind him, struggling to stand. He suddenly felt someone grasp his arm. 5 gently lifted 9 to his feet, handing him his life staff for support. 9 grasped it, leaning against it and shakily standing. He patted the one-eyed mechanic's shoulder in thanks, slinging the strap of his blade over his shoulder. 9 walked out into the center of the drawing room, 5 beside him. The rest of the coven was already approaching him, ready to travel back to the Citadel once again. They gathered together, ready to discuss what to do next. The first step of the plan went really well. Now all we have to do is kill the machine beast, and then the machine, 9 said, looking around the coven. This statement hushed everyone who had been murmuring quietly to each other. An eerie, uncomfortable silence filled the room, and 9 looked at each individual face. The machine beast will have to die first, because it's half of the machine's protection. I have the talisman. He touched his uninjured side, faintly feeling the lump of the device beneath his fingers. And that danger is out of the way. I'll lure the machine beast to me. And then he looked at them again, trailing off, not realizing the problem. The others glanced uneasily at each other. Who would kill the machine beast? Who would kill the spy machine? Someone needed to. 9 was much too weak to do it himself. He knew that. He was not so arrogant or stupid enough to give it a try. Going to a direct battle was stretching it enough. I will kill it, 7 said to him firmly, proudly accepting this duty as her own. Her fist tightened around her spear, looking him straight in the face. 9 closed his eyes inside, but knew he could not keep her from her duty to her coven. He gave her a nod. Once 7 kills the machine beast, we'll be able to destroy the machine, he finished, and everyone nodded in unison. With 9 at the lead, the clan turned and headed out of the cabin. They entered the emptiness once again, knowing that they were probably heading towards their final battle. Everyone was hushed as they walked through the city, the icy air biting at their skin. The dark clouds above almost certainly promised rain. Thunder rumbling softly far off in the distance. Soft curtains of rain embraced the mountains. The Stitchpunks navigated the treacherous landscape as they'd once done, walking over hills and past destroyed buildings, through tripwires and meadows that were once fields of battle. 9 listened to the landscape carefully, looking around every few seconds. He was incredibly anxious. A vast blanket of mist hung heavily over the land. It gripped every ruined building. Every day. Familiar objects were now shrouded in mystery, like some forgotten dream. It descended on his face and arms, tiny droplets running down his cheeks. It was incredibly difficult to see through the fog, meaning that the machines could very easily sneak up on him and attack. However, the spy machine was nowhere to be seen, and for that he was grateful. It must have been in the citadel, repairing whatever damage 7 and 8 had inflicted on its master. Nevertheless, he was determined to see it for the final time, to help the warrior kill it. Then he would take the talisman and destroy the machine, once and for all. Never to hunt them down again. The war would be over, and the others would finally be safe. It was in this thought that drove 9 on, despite the pain and weakness that made it hard to take each step. "Are you doing all right?" 5 asked softly, walking beside him. It made him nervous to see how heavily 9 leaned on his staff, how seriously he limped. However, the younger Stitchpunk nodded, giving him a small, weak smile. 5 reached up and grasped his shoulder. "You're going to be okay. I promise," he said, as if not only to reassure 9, but to reassure himself. 9 frowned and quickly averted his gaze, his heart compressing. They were going to be okay. He was going to make sure of it. And he was going to miss them all with all of his heart. Whoa, stop!" 9 said suddenly, throwing his arm out and preventing 5 from taking another step forward. He stopped short, startled. The others looked up, frightened by the sudden alarm. "Is it the machine beast?" 7 said, tightening her hold on her spear, preparing for any threat that dared approach her clan. 9 shook his head, taking a step back. "No, look," he said, gesturing down towards the ground. The Stitchpunks gathered around, squinting through the fog to see what he was pointing at. Cutting across the path was a wide crisscrossing of sharp wooden planks, obviously covering a crater dug in the war. It was most likely a tank trap, used to take down machines and kill them. The sides of the pit had eroded over time, making the planks bow in slightly as it held to the earth. The planks were unevenly crisscrossed, obviously quickly hacked together, sharp, rusted nails jutting straight upwards out of the length of the holes, peppering the trap. 9 sighed in frustration. There was no way to get around it. The hills around them were too steep to climb. Circling back around would take ages, and the machine could very well find them at that point. "What do we do now?" 5 asked anxiously, the shy male looking worriedly at the wooden boards. They all looked highly unstable, coming apart in slivers and would snap in any second. However, 9 knew they had to get to the citadel as quickly as possible. He took a step forward, hesitantly resting his foot on the edge of the board. It creaked lightly, but didn't give way. 9, whatever you're doing, get back here at once. It's not safe," Duke cried out, rushing forward and reaching a hand out for the younger Stitchpunk. 9 continued walking forward slowly, gently placing his feet down with every step. The board released a pathetic creaking sound as he stepped carefully over the planks. Looking over his shoulder, he addressed the rest of the clan, who were all staring at him anxiously. "I'll go first. Make sure it's safe. Follow right behind me, and be careful," 9 instructed gently, waving them forward. 7 immediately followed him, dauntless as ever. She walked carefully on the path 9 had taken. One by one, the others would soon walk cautiously across the planks, mindful of where they put their feet. 8 was trying to be especially careful, being the heaviest one of them all. As they slowly walked across, The boards creaked and groaned lightly, but they didn't break. 9 continued to walk forward, gently tapping the planks ahead with the end of the light staff. He then looked over his shoulder, making sure the others were all together. He then noticed 5 was lagging far behind the group, hands clasped together and shuffling forward. Turning to 7, who walked beside him, he gestured for her to keep leading the others on. She nodded as he walked past the rest of the Stitch Punks back to his best friend. Poor 5 was stuck in a rather thin section of the tank trap, only a few boards covering the darkness below. "It's okay, 5. Just a few more steps." 9 coaxed him gently, reaching a hand out for him. 5 looked up at him, soothed slightly by his gentle voice. Taking a deep breath, he took another hesitant step forward. The plank groaned softly and bowed a little, but he didn't stop. Slowly but surely, 5 continued to walk forward to 9. He stepped out with one foot, brought the other to match it, and slowly moved across. "Nearly there. You can do it," he encouraged his friend, reaching out slightly farther. 5 inched forward, moving slightly faster than he raised a hand back to 9. Soon, he was clutching his hand tightly, the younger Stitch Punk pulling him forward and away from the thin boards. He exhaled a deep sigh of relief, walking forward at a more even pace now. 9 patted him on the shoulder, giving him a smile. "See, I told you," he said, chuckling. 5 grinned back. 9 then moved to take a step forward, trying to catch back up to the others. As soon as he set a foot down, the creak noise increased sharply in volume. Before he had a chance to move or even think, the board beneath his feet snapped as a large crack echoed through the air. 9 plummeted down with a startled shout, immediately disappearing into the darkness. 5 instantly rushed forward as soon as he saw him fall. "9!" he cried in horror. The others whirled around at the sound of the cracking noise that was now echoing through the emptiness. 7 rushed around the others, gracefully leaping from board to board and trying to get to the dark crevice where 9 had fallen. However, even she wasn't fast enough. The planks bowed and splinters flew everywhere as they all shattered underneath the coven. Cries and shouts filled the air as they all plummeted down into the darkness, the world around disappearing. Everything was silent for a few moments as Stitch Punks lay at the bottom of the crevice. They landed on something hard and solid. The ground beneath their feet dripped and rose. Instead of being smooth like a floor, 5 opened his single eye, blinking in the darkness. He rubbed the sides of his head, sitting up. His heart pounded, still reeling from the sudden fall. However, he sighed softly in relief as he heard shuffling of the others' ragdolls as they tried to gain their bearings in the darkness. "Is everyone okay?" 7 noticed suddenly. His voice suddenly spoke, echoing slightly in groans of consent. The twins made sure to flash their lights to tell that they were all right as well. 5 sat for a moment, trying to calm down a bit as his eye adjusted to the darkness. He could now make out the shapes of his friends. They all appeared to be covered in dust and dizzy from the fall, but unharmed. Getting to his feet, 5 carefully shuffled forward to where he could make out 7's familiar shape. She stood, picking up her spear and adjusting her skullnet. The two looked up towards the small bit of light that streamed in from high above their heads. There was a hole in the planks from where they had fallen, and there was no possible way of climbing back up. It was a sheer drop. Seven sighed in frustration, then turned away. Five sighed as well, knowing that they were trapped now. Reaching back into his pack, he pulled out a match, striking it against the hard wall of wherever they landed. The match went immediately aflame, providing some light in the dark pit. Five looked around, resting the light on each of the faces of his coven, and making sure they were all together. Everyone looked slightly dazed, a little startled, but none worse for wear. Five then jumped slightly as he realized there was only eight of them there. "Boy, has anybody seen Nine?" he cried out, a voice reverberating off of the unseen walls. Everyone looked up in alarm, realizing the young man who had fallen first was not with them. "Everyone, look anywhere you can, but don't get lost yourself," Seven instructed briskly, waving a hand towards different directions of the crevice. She was firm, immediately taking action, but everyone could read how her voice shook. Five handed her the torch, and she immediately ran off. Holding the flame up high, the others parted, heading different ways to try to find Nine. The older burlap stitch punk looked around in the darkness, trying to find his friend. His heart raced and his hands trembled in worry. Nine had to be okay. He just had to be. As the light from the match passed by, Five then spotted a bulb of the light staff lying on the ground. He groped around slightly, his fingers then closed around the staff. Drawing the bulb to its socket, it immediately illuminated the world around him. Blinking in the sudden light, he turned and shone the bulb all around him, holding the staff up high. Five scanned the ground ahead. It was nothing but a rocky incline, sloping gently downwards. Slowly and carefully, he stepped forward, easing himself to go down the slope. As he did so, the light caught the shape of something, and Five quickly looked up. Pointing the staff to the direction of the figure, the light shined down on the form lying at the bottom of the slope, sprawled around on the ground, and very still. "Nine!" Five cried, hopping down from the rocks and rushed towards the injured Stitchpunk. His heart lurched as he saw he wasn't moving. Dropping to his knees beside Nine, Five gently shook his shoulder, hoping beyond hope that he was all right. Much to his relief, Nine was awake. His eyes were open, and he was trying to move his limbs. He seemed stunned, gasping haltingly and struggling for breath. Five grasped his arms to help him sit up. "Are you okay?" he asked as Nine bent over on his hands and his knees, still fighting for breath. I think so." He gasped for it in a breath. It's not bad. I think I got the wind knocked out," he struggled to say. The halting tone of his speech and desperate gasping every few seconds startled Five. The hero placed his hands on the other side of Nine's ribcage, trying not to touch the worst of his injuries. He pulled up sharply, arching Nine's back. This enabled the winded Stitchpunk to breathe, gasping for air desperately. "Just breathe, deep breaths," Five instructed gently, rubbing his back and giving off soft pats. Panting, Nine then made a movement to sit up, but immediately collapsed. His face contorted in pain, clutching his injured side over his metallic ribs. "Nine?" he asked worryingly, leaning over him and examining the injured side. The fabric was slightly wrinkled where Nine's hand lay, and every breath he took seemed to exhaust him. It was obvious most of his ribs were bent, out of place, or broken, probably even more now so after such a fall. Nonetheless, Nine waved Five off, trying to get to his feet. I'm okay. I'm fine, he said, still struggling to take a deep breath. We shouldn't have crossed. I should have found another path. I'm sorry. Five hushed the younger Stitch Punk reassuringly, gently rubbing his back as he tried to find his strength to stand. The pain was hot, feeling like it was all burning him alive. All he could do now was lean onto his friend, hoping for a brief lull of pain to give him a chance and continue on. It's okay. It wasn't your fault. We'll find a way out, the mechanic said softly, feeling like his heart was in knots. He wanted nothing more than to heal his friend, knowing that the battle he was fighting was taking every last bit of strength he had. But he had made a promise to Nine, and as badly as he didn't want to, he was going to keep it. Five gently grasped Nine's shoulder, helping him stand. He handed him the light staff, the light now revealing the world around them. It appeared that they were trapped in some sort of cave. The rounded walls stretched high above their heads. The rocks wavered in color every so often, morphing from soft brown to near reds and blues. It tapered into the long tunnel that wound around the corner, their only way out. "Nine!" a voice suddenly cried from behind them. The two boys turned to see Seven leaping down the slopes, and look of relief on her face. She immediately ran to Nine, glad to see that he was all right. She wrapped one arm around his shoulder, giving him a brief embrace. He stumbled slightly, stiffening in surprise as she embraced him. She then pulled away, smiling. Nine gave her a small smile back, then looked towards the direction of the tunnel as the others joined them. "Well, I guess there's only one way out to go. I guess there's only one way to go now," he said, gesturing forward, holding his life staff high. The Nine began to venture further the cavern. The shadows of the Stitch Punks towered over their owners, passing along the walls. Their footsteps echoed softly, every movement heard as it was so quiet. There was a light breeze that touched their skins, heading in the same direction as they were. Nine led the others carefully over the slightly slippery rocks, hearing the distinct drip in the distance. As they stepped over a small slope, helping one another down, Nine reached up to Five, guiding two to down the rocks. The older man had been walking quite a lot without complaint, aided only by his cane and determination. As Nine gently eased two to the ground, his brows ceased in worry as he felt the old inventor shaking underneath his fingers. Nevertheless, two merely patted the youngster's hand and continued walking forward. The flame on his top hat flickered and danced happily. The small clink of his cane against the rock resonated off the cave walls. Nine turned and caught up to two, still a bit anxious about his condition. However, the resilient old man merely looked up, golden eyes shining in the light. You took quite a tumble, my boy," he said softly. Are you sure you're all right?" Nine couldn't help but chuckle. He'd been traveling non-stop for days, and had fought valiantly besides the others, despite his age, and was still concerned for nothing but his others. "I'm fine too, really. I'll be okay once this war is over," Nine said reassuringly. He then lowered his eyes, thinking, since he had met him, Nine hadn't really had a chance to speak with two. He had small conversations here and there, during the brief time after the Five had been brought back. But that was it. This could be the first time since two found Nine out in the emptiness that they would be able to speak alone. Well, as alone as they could manage while lingering behind the others. Nine began softly, almost unsure of how to say this. I never got the chance to thank you. You saved my life. Twice. This newcomer you never knew nothing about. You never knew even existed. You sacrificed yourself at the cost of my foolishness. I never should have done that. And I'm so sorry. He struggled to say, each word burning him like he'd fallen on a batch of coals. His heart ached as he could only drop his head with a sigh. Everything was silent for a moment before Nine felt a hand grasp his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked down to see two smiling warmly at him. My boy, everybody makes mistakes in their life. I will always love you. I saw how you fought to try to free us. Even when our dear Seven didn't feel it was all right. I've always been watching. I saw how terrible you feel. And I don't want you to feel as such any longer. We're back now, together. And we're all still here, thanks to you. Two said gently, squeezing Nine's shoulder. The younger felt his heart compress at the words, his lips trembling. As long as we stay together, we shall be fine. We are strong, and we shall win this war, lad. Like you said, just keep the hope. He finished. Nine couldn't help but smile down at Two, suddenly feeling a bit stronger. The step he took were less shaky, more confident. His clan was going to survive this, and finally live their lives as intended. The determination that kept him moving forward straightened even more. They were going to make it. The Stitchpunk clan continued walking forward through the crevice through the cavern, the tunnel seeming to stretch on forever. However, Nine couldn't help but look all around, his eyes wide as he looked at every formation, every color. Large rocks jutting from the smooth floor to the cave, the walls and floors sloping into the shapes only found in nature. Though it was dark, the light from the staff caught every color as it gently blended together. To the unstitched punk, it was eerily beautiful. They didn't slow down to a halt, gathering together before them. Cutting through the ground was a wide, swiftly flowing river. The water was clear, but incredibly dark. They couldn't see the riverbed, and it was so wide even nimble Seven couldn't make it across in one jump. Fortunately, however, there was a set of smooth stones creating a path across the river. Hey, look! I think it's the entrance, Five said, pointing towards the smallest shaft of life across the river. They were nearly out. All right, but we need to cross those rocks. They look slippery, so be careful. One at a time, Nine instructed, waving them forward. Eight was the first one to step forward, jumping easily from the riverbank onto the first rock. Instead of jumping to the second one, however, he turned around and held out his hands, reaching the others. Here, jump. I'll catch you. Nine nodded, and gently resting his hands on the backs of the twins. Okay, boys, go ahead. The twins nodded in unison and took a step forward. Three leaped first, and then four. Eight easily caught them, easing them onto the rock beside them. Nine was right. They were incredibly. Four caught Three's hand and stumbled backwards, nearly falling into the river. However, they both recovered and managed to make it across the other side of the stream, standing safely. Eight gave a satisfied nod and turned back around, reaching out for the two elders. One jumped first, landing squarely on the first rock. Eight helped his leader step across the stone, guiding him gently. One leapt to the second rock, then to the other side of the river. 2 followed quickly after, 8 gently catching him and lifting him to the other side of the rock. The old man patted the younger's arm in appreciation, then leapt to the second rock. Just as he made to the second jump, he slipped and was pinched forward with the startled shout. One, however, lurched forward and caught 2 in his arms before he plunged to the river. "Watch yourself, Lord," one said as he caught 2, gently pulling him on top of the bank. 2 patted his shoulder, panting heavily. "Thank you," he said, taking a deep breath and straightening. He then jumped the rest of the way across, following closely by 6. 5 then turned around to 7 and gave her a quick nod. He leapt to the first rock, then the second, and paused. He turned, looking back across the river as if waiting for something. 7 quickly followed, only jumping to the first rock with a beautiful grace. It looked as if it took her no effort at all as she sailed through the air. Landing softly on the stone, 9 couldn't help but stare a moment, entranced by her splendor. However, when she quickly turned around, he snapped back to reality, realizing he was the last one left on the bank. Just as he thought about jumping, his side gave a painful twinge. However, 7 held a hand out to him, reaching over the water. "Come on, 9, she said, giving him a small wave. He took a deep breath, forcing himself not to look down at the water. He took a single step backwards, then gathered his wearing strength and pushed off the side of the riverbank. He leapt over to 7, landing squarely on the rock. However, he found he was correct, and it was incredibly slippery. His left foot slipped out into the beneath him, sending a jolt of white-hot pain shooting up his side. He fell to his knees, hands flying up to clutch his ribs, where the pain seared the worst. He let out a gasp, trying to catch his breath and overcome with pain. 7 hands were suddenly around him, trying to get him back to his feet. "Are you all right?" she asked anxiously, keeping him upright. 9 nodded, patting her hand as she managed to get his feet underneath him. He looked up, seeing 5 reach out for them, looking extremely concerned after seeing the injured young man fall. "Come on, 9. You can do it. You're nearly there," 5 coaxed gently. Just as 9 had boards, hearing him say this gave 9 a bit more strength. He took a deep breath, bending his knees slightly. He leapt, side screaming with pain, but he managed to land safely in the second rock. 5 immediately caught him, helping him to keep his balance. 9 looked up and smiled at him, thankfully giving his arm a brief squeeze before straightening. He found himself facing 1, who stood on the other side of the riverbank. He was reaching out, giving an impatient wave. "Come on, boy, jump," he said almost gently. 9 nodded and braced himself, tensing. He clenched his jaw, leaped, and leapt, pushing off on the slippery stone as hard as he could. He felt his feet land on the other side, but his heart skipped a beat as he felt himself begin to fall backwards. The bank was too slippery. He gave a startled shout, the ancient stone crumbling slightly underneath his feet. However, before he plunged into the rushing water, he felt claw-like fingers close around his wrist. Looking up, he saw that 1 had caught him, holding him by the arm, and then pulling him back onto the solid ground. 9 bent his head, struggling to catch his breath. His whole body seemed to be enveloped in pain, but he knew that he could not give up just yet. Keeping his lame leg slightly elevated, he allowed himself to lean onto 1 just for a moment, trying to gather his composure. The older Stitchpunk held him up, even patting his back lightly. 9 then looked up at the man he had clashed with for so long. Thank you. Thank you, he said, and one helped him to straighten. 5 and 7 left the rest of the way across the river and made it safely to the other side. One then turned around after making sure 9 had his balance, waving the others forward as they looked up to the dim light of the entrance. They continued on, following the oldest as they headed towards the wide opening of the cavern. 9 limped heavily. The fall he'd taken probably wounded him even further. His side, especially along his ribcage, hurt even worse now. However, someone took his arm and supported him, easing the pressure of it. He put on his leg for a moment. He saw that it was 5, noticing how badly his friend was staggering and going to his aid. They continued on, 9 incredibly grateful for 5's help. He leaned on him, hoping beyond hope that he could hold on, that his body didn't give out on him. The clan was bathed in a dull gray light, extinguishing the darkness they journeyed through. They all blinked, lifting their hands and shielding their eyes. They reached the entrance of the cavern. I'm going to see how far the citadel is, 7 said, sprinting forward out of the cavern and onto the emptiness. Quickly climbing up the face of the hill the cave was carved into. As she disappeared, the coven waited for the warrior to return. It was eerily silent for a moment, the only noise being the hollow wind that whistled through the cave. Then 2 spoke, his voice echoing silently. Here, lads, let us see if there is any supplies that we can use here, he said, gesturing to the pile of rubbish surrounding him. 9 then noticed that there was something like a human camp in the mouth of the cave. It was similar to those he had seen countless times, but the ones that belonged to soldiers that had once fought in the war, but somewhat different, friendlier, it seemed. There were large blankets laid out on the ground, thin and worn pillows upon them. There was an oil lamp, several boxes of matches, a small broken radio, and a little stuffed doll that looked as if it had been thoroughly loved. 5 walked forward as the others all started developing to the old abandoned camp, searching for anything useful. 9 walked forwards as well, bending down and lifting one of the blankets before spotting something propped against the rocky wall. Standing up, he approached it. It was a framed picture, about as tall as he was. The glass was shattered, the frame splintered. The picture faded, but 9 couldn't help but study it closely. There were 4 humans, all smiling and happy. There were 2 grown men, arms around each other's shoulders. One of the men held a beautiful woman close. Standing in front of them was a small girl, holding a tattered doll. The young stitch punk reached forward, resting his hand on the glass. This must have been the hideout for the family in the picture, trying to stay alive in the war. He couldn't help but notice the way they held to one another, their sparkling eyes, their happy smiles. 9 sighed softly, touching each face of those in the picture. In that quiet moment, he realized exactly what he wanted most of all. He wanted his family. He wanted to stay with them, to feel what it was like to truly be at peace with people he loved. But it would never happen, and it broke his heart to think so. He needed to kill the machine before his body gave out on himself. Every breath he took pained him, and it frightened him. He didn't know how long it could last. 9 found himself thinking that if he didn't wake the fabrication machine in the first place, then perhaps he'd already be living peacefully with those he could call his family. Perhaps he would finally understand who he was meant to be. As he brought his hand over the faces of the young men, He realized they looked very much alike. One was slightly younger, meaning that they must have been brothers. Realizing this made Nine turn slightly to see Five, the one-eyed mechanic digging through a small box. The younger Stitchpunk grimaced, feeling his chin quiver, as he watched Five, the older, had always been there for him, no matter what he did, no matter what happened. He saved his life. Five was more than his best friend. He was his brother. He always has been. He'd been by his side since the dawn of his life. And I knew he would be there until the inevitable dusk. The thought forced Nine to close his eyes and turn his head away, struggling to keep his emotions within. He rested his forehead against the glass of the picture, optics clinking lightly. It broke his heart to think of what lay ahead, but he knew he couldn't allow it to eclipse the mission before him. Suddenly, he felt a hand upon his shoulder. Turning quietly, he was met with the worried expression of the older burlap Stitchpunk. He fought to erase all emotion away from his face before he gave himself away. "You okay?" Five asked softly, single brow furrowed. Nine nodded, patting his hand and turning away from the picture with one final glance over his shoulder. The clan had gathered a few useful items from what the humans had left. They all gathered together as Seven dropped down in front of them from the side of the cavern. She straightened, looking at her fellows with intensity. "The citadel's close. Come on. We have to keep moving," Seven instructed them, gesturing with her spear and turning away, leading them towards the fortress. They all followed, gathered up with their supplies and taking a collective breath. Nine shut his eyes, inhaling deeply as he gathered all the courage he had. He knew that it was it. They were heading towards their final battle. End of chapter 23.